Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is a recent reads video. Jonathan Lethem's book, published in 2020, I think it's still his last one, The Arrest. Dionne Brand, The Blue Clerk. Samantha Harvey, Dear Thief. Andrey Kurkov, Ukrainian author, A Matter of Life and Death, translated by George Bird. The Silk Road by Kathryn Davis. So I'm going to start with Jonathan Lethem, The Arrest. Now, I'm a big Lethem fan. I particularly admire his skill that he can either write straight up literary fiction, or he can write straight up genre, or a combination of both. And I would say that this is one of his genre works. It's a mixture of utopia and post-apocalyptic dystopia. So in a similar way to Don DeLillo's book The Silence, all technology has been knocked out because we're so reliant on the digital world, and something has happened to knock that out permanently, and cars won't work, there's no petrol, there's no power. So in part of America, I think in Maine, a rural idyll utopia has formed where everybody is sort of pulling together unasked, but they, the way they interact with each other, and they don't have to barter formally, but it's sort of unspoken for food and everything. It's a really nice community. And then outside of that is what's called the Cordon, which is basically a sort of paramilitary motorcycle gang style of thing, and they have an uneasy existence because the utopian village will supply them with food to leave them alone and also to guarantee their security. And then this idyll is interrupted by this sort of the last surviving machine in America, which is sort of portrayed on the cover, which is sort of a tunnelling machine with a sort of a nuclear engine powering it. And it's called the Blue Streak, and it's driven by a guy called Todd Baum, who is a pre-apocalypse friend of the mainstay of this rural community called Maddie. And Maddie has a brother who is the narrator, who is, everyone calls him Journeyman, because that sort of describes what he is. Pre-apocalypse, the Journeyman and Todd Baum were sort of pitching scripts to Hollywood, that Todd Baum would come up with the ideas or where to ransack ideas from other existing works of literature. And the Journeyman would basically do the grunt work of churning out the scripts. And then one day Maddie comes to visit her brother and falls beneath the sort of the wicked spell of Todd Baum. It's never explicit whether there was a sexual relationship or whether he was sort of held sway over her by inveigling her into their project, which is this great script, which is made of two parts. One is a utopia, and one is a post-apocalyptic dystopia. So you begin to see that in a way, the book is a sort of meta version of that not only is it happening as described in the book, that this is the state of the world, but also that it seems to be following the script that all three of these main characters drew up. And Maddie hates Todd Baum, and they won't let him into the village. And the Cordon are very suspicious of him because he sort of ran over a couple of their number. They realise the power of his machine, so they want to get hold of the machine, but it's impermeable. There's no way of getting into it. So they then put it on the utopian village that they have to deal with the machine. They have to get rid of Todd Baum and basically hand the machine over to him. What's so good about this book is, first of all, the plot doesn't miss a single beat. Second of all, the world building is not done through description and sort of telling you how you got there. It's done simply through the transactions of the characters. Credible events that you believe to be happening in real time give you so much information. Now, it's true the characters on the whole are not fully fledged, like you might get in a literary fiction novel. But actually there's enough characterisation here, particularly in the Journeyman, and this concept of him being a journeyman. And his sister basically forces him to choose sides between Todd Baum, his old friend, and her. and that becomes the crux of his character journey as to which side is he going to come down on. But even the way that is structured, you know, it just turns the notch it. The plot just turns a notch it each time. And it's so clever because it's been embedded, but you haven't foreseen it. And I just think it's a wonderful piece of writing. You know, I'm not particularly into genre works, but this is almost a perfect rendition of it. 5 stars. And because I'm not particularly into genre works, even though this is a 5-star read, it probably won't get to my top 10 reads of the year. But it's still a piece of impeccable, flawless writing. Possibly, I do like his literary fiction works, but I'd say of all the books, in a way, this is the most perfectly crafted and self-contained of all of his books. There are some indulgences in some of his other books, which can maybe get you down. This plays it very, you know, it keeps its discipline. 5 stars. And on to Dionne Brand, The Blue Clerk. Now, I saw Eric Carl Anderson mention this. I hadn't heard of it before, or the author, although she's a poet, really. When he did a video, which I'll post the link to, on 10 experimental works by women writers. Just the word experimental always makes you prick up my ears, and also by women, because a lot of the sort of postmodern pioneers were men, were white men. So it's really good to, you know, find something A, by a woman, and B, by a woman of colour, as Dionne Brand is. And I love this. You know, this is 5 stars, and this could very well get into my top 10 reads of the year. It's a prose poem, as the subtitle suggests, Ars Poetica in 59 versos. And it's really about writing and composition, because the blue clerk of the title is this figure who's in a blue coat, and her right hand is clean and dry, her left hand is wet and covered in blue ink. And she is stationed at some sort of dockside in a port, which is sort of basically abandoned. And she's waiting for a ship to come to pick up all these bales of paper, which have been produced by the author, who is the other main character in this. And they're called the left-hand pages of the author's work, because what they represent are the source material, the logical chains of thought as the writer's going on, the inspirations, the sources, news items that she wants to respond to. So in a way, they're the sort of the prompts to whatever she produces in the right-hand pages. Now, we don't have the right-hand pages, we only have this stuff. And although they are embarking in a debate, sort of back and forth, sort of querying the contents of the left-hand pages, it builds up what the reader can see what the right-hand page is, what the finished version would be, and it's very, very artfully done. And there's musings on sort of poetry versus prose, the function and nature of art. She'll talk about John Coltrane's music. She'll talk about Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man. She'll talk about War, Desert Storm and Yugoslavian Civil War. She'll talk about art and politics. And the writing is incredible. In a way, it reminded me a bit of Claudia Rankine's book Citizen, which is also sort of prose poetry and about some of the similar themes. But I just thought the writing here was at a higher level of artistry. I'm just going to give you 2 examples to illustrate that. So this is verse 09. Some say that poets should not attempt it. Some and they. I absorb all anxieties. But you don't resolve them. You are no relief from them. You merely elaborate them. You make me more anxious. How many times have you said, it is not my job, I can do nothing about anything, the clerk repeats, I can only collect. Stay on matters of nature, on matters of love, on the domestic, on language, sound. Furrow the same row, the esoteric, not history or politics. This is the conservative line of poetry. To stay away from politics, stay away from intervening the everyday, except soothe, sage, bring good tidings, observe beauty. Give light when all is dark. Assure us that we are benevolent and good at the core. Lift us from the daily troubles of the world. Elevate our molecular concerns, our parochial individual lives to the level of art. Convince us that we are not petty and ridiculous. And brutal, adds the clerk. And brutal, says the author. And brutal. That we are tied in some universal good, some deep knowing. The clerk sighs. That's God or mother, not poet. Listen to the bitterness dug into that furrow. Poetry must be eternal, not temporal. Who is at eternity testing this theory? So, you know, the debate about, you know, what is art for, art and politics, I think just brilliantly conjured up there. And then here's another one where the author has been to a museum basically of slavery, the history of slavery in London Docklands, and is sort of wrestling with what she's seen. When the clerk receives this, she asks the author, "But this is perfectly respectable for the right-hand page. Why burden me with this too?" "Yes," the author said, "but it is so tedious. This type of material is worn out, yet it keeps flying around like love flies around in the head. So much debris, brain debris, like the memory of lovers or wives. It repeats without resolution. No one wants to hear about it any more, but it stays in the air. I wake up and it's there. I go to sleep and it's there. I look out on the garden and it's there. It's invisible like the debris around our planet now, but it's there, emitting shafts of pink and green light through the atmosphere." So there, I think it again, it sort of just encapsulates the divide between sort of Afro-American and white, that the sort of the white Americans, or in her case Canadians, would rather it just all went away. I mean, you know, why do they keep moaning about it? Why do they keep bringing this up? Versus the Afro-American position is, whether we're bringing it up or not, it doesn't matter. It's still there. It pervades everything in our modern society. So I just think, fabulous book, 5 stars, as I say, could get my top 10. And similar can be said for this, Dear Thief by Samantha Harvey. So I've read a couple of Harvey books before, one fiction, one non-fiction. The fiction I think was called Wilderness. I can't really remember now, but I didn't really get on with it. I wanted to give her another chance, and I found another novel of hers, but it was sort of historical fiction, which I have no interest in. But I did discover a non-fiction work of hers called The Shapeless Unease, which is about a year of insomnia for her. Now, I'm a chronic 40-year-plus insomniac, so I was very interested in it. And although I didn't think it was great on insomnia, it had some wonderful insights in it. It was possibly my sort of non-fiction read of the year that year. So I went back to her to see what else was available, and I saw this, Dear Thief. So I thought, right, this hopefully will be a tiebreaker. And I really, really enjoyed this. I mean, there is a sort of spoiler that I will give, but in a way it's not a spoiler because it's pretty obvious. It's a ménage à trois, 2 female friends who grew up together on the border between Wales and England in the countryside. One of them moves to London, the other is a sort of a nomadic sort of journeyer. And the one who moves to London on the day that her grandmother dies in front of her, I mean her grandmother was sick, to sort of get out of the house, goes for a walk by the Thames where there's a lot of stuff washes up and can be found in the mud, where she meets this guy who will eventually become her husband, called Nicholas. But the book is told from the point of view of this woman at age 52, still living in London, where she's lost her husband. Her son very rarely sees her, so she's very much sort of isolated, and she works in a care home. And she's sort of, in a way, blames her friend, her nomadic friend, for the sort of state of affairs. Dear Thief, you know, there's a betrayal involved, as I say, you can probably guess what it is. And so the book is the contents of a letter that she writes every day, or she adds on to every day, that she'll probably never send because she doesn't know where her friend currently is. She thinks she's somewhere in one of the Baltic states where the other friend's family were from originally, but she doesn't know exactly where. And into this letter, she pours out her sort of life, really, the build-up to the relationship with her husband, and how it all sort of, you know, how this nomadic friend keeps coming in and out of her life with sort of destructive effects. So there's a lot of anger, but also she's aware that really it says more about her than about her friend, and also that it might be misrepresentation. That, you know, how can you ascribe exactly what another person is feeling, you know, when you know, you're not even in control of what you yourself is feeling. You might not necessarily know exactly how or why you feel as you do. So to then suppose you do for someone else is unrealistic. So, for example, she offers this ideal moment where she, her husband and her child were up in Scotland fishing for oysters, and they're stood in a fast-flowing river, and she is next to her boy, and she looks across to where her husband is in the water, and he has this expression on her face that at the time she assumed was sort of beatific happiness, but subsequent to what happened afterwards, she thought, well, maybe she'd misread it, and that if her friend had been there, which she wasn't, how would she have interpreted? Because it's a sort of triangulated relationship. So I just think it was really, really simple but effective, and the writing. I mean, what I love about Samantha Harvey is some of her insights, and I'm just going to give you a couple here. My own father once said that your children are beautiful to you in a way that nothing else is. As a girl, I remember him telling me about my beauty as if he were outlining a profound fact, or setting out a singular truth. It was not a description, because that would suggest it was from his point of view. No, it was an explanation of my very particular beauty as known by him, the world expert on the subject. He knew something about me that I would never be able to know myself. He knew it because he was my parent and preceded me, and could see into all the voids from which I'd sprung. And as soon as I became a parent, I could acquire that piercing vision and could know and see the same as my father had known and seen. It is such a steady love you feel for your child, bottomless and generous. And all afternoon I have missed Teddy, and every time he goes I miss him, as if each time he falls once and for all from the face of the earth. So I just think that's a very sort of profound observation that I never really thought about before, that the parent has a unique perspective on the unique beauty of their child. And then there's this. They were not idols, you said. They were not supposed to be worshipped as real. They were merely illustrations of ideas that could not be conceptualized otherwise, almost like dreams. I remember you saying this because the more time that grows between me and that conversation, the more I realise how true it is, that we are forced to invent form to understand the formless, time to understand the timeless. Religion has trinities, you said, because a triangle is the holiest and most elegant of things. With 2 lines you can only create 2 lines, but with 3 you can create a shape. This is why 3 is a transformative number. Brahma and Vishnu, creation and preservation, these are 2 lines. It is Shiva that transforms them into something new. And then, just as abruptly, you said, by the way, I have a new lover. I just think it was fantastic writing, and I've become an absolute convert. And on to Andrey Kurkov, A Matter of Life and Death. I had the privilege of seeing Andrey Kurkov talk in London through my job at an event that we put on that he was the guest of honour. I've read a couple of his books before. This is one of the older ones. I think this goes back to the 90s, after Ukraine was sort of recently free of Russia, Soviet Russia, but was very unstable like Soviet Russia was. And the hero of this book is someone who has a complete dead-end life, thinks there's nothing worth living for, so he decides he's going to make his death memorable. And he's going to make his death memorable because he's going to organise an assassin to kill him. And that way it would get a couple of inches in the newspaper because it would be such an unusual crime. And as he puts this plan into operation and he lines up the assassin and all sorts of other things, suddenly his fortunes turn for the better, and he meets a woman, he makes some money, he has a job, and obviously this forces him to reconsider this plan that is already in motion. And that's essentially what the book is. It's very short. I don't think it's as good as the other 2 of his books I've read. It's strange, it's an absurd, surreal sort of situation, but it's somewhat lacking in its execution it doesn't really deliver that much humour, which I was surprised at. So I gave this 3 stars. And finally, in terms of what I've read, The Silk Road by Kathryn Davis. My first exposure to Kathryn Davis, and I have no idea what's going on in this book. It seems to start off in a yoga class, and when they're all sort of recumbent in a pose, and the yoga teacher says, okay, up and let's move to another one of the number doesn't get up off the mat, so presumably they've died or something. And then it seems to move into the attendees at the yoga class swapping stories about while they're on a journey or a pilgrimage even. It's a bit sort of Canterbury Tales, although much more weirder than that. And it seems they've all shared an upbringing, that they're either members of the same family or they all grew up in the same community. And that's about as far as I can tell you, until they reach the destination at the end, which is obviously some sort of spiritual thing. I can't remember any of the detail of the events that happened on this journey. And just to say, in her acknowledgements, or the end bits, no, it isn't acknowledgements, I want to thank Louise Gluck, the poet, and Polly Young Eisendrath, who together with Olaus Magnus, Lucretius and the Tibetan Book of the Dead are among the animating spirits of my book. So if you're familiar with Lucretius, Louise Gluck's poetry and the Tibetan Book of the Dead, you may well get something out of this. I'm familiar with all of them and I got nothing out of it. 2.5. And onto, I have finished another book. This is the first of my non-fiction November, The Mortal Coil by David Boyd Hancock. I'm not going to talk about this now. I'll round up all 4 titles of my non-fiction November at the end of the month, but I have finished it. As to what I'm currently reading, so this is the second of my non-fiction November reads, John Gray, Straw Dogs. Halfway through it. Should finish it tomorrow. And Percival Everett's latest book came out this week, at least in the UK, Dr. No. I will finish this tomorrow, I would imagine, maybe even tonight. And it's kind of interesting that, in a way, they share a theme, which is sort of, this book is trying to disabuse humanism as being, you know, a worthy credo, saying that it actually shares the same beliefs of any religion, particularly Christianity, any Western religion, particularly Christianity, that man is superior from animals because we have language, consciousness, a concept of self, all these sorts of things, and that people like Copernicus, Galileo and Darwin, who, if their theories had been followed through, if they'd been able to throw off the religious shackle, would have admitted that their theories prove that man has no special status, Earth has no special status, we are random bits of DNA seeking to perpetuate itself on a planet that is entirely random in how life has spawned there. But we can't accept our sort of lowly status. And in a way, Dr. No is exploring a similar theme of trying to define, there's lots of energy trying to define what infinity is, but equally, what is nothing? What is nothingness? It's not zero. What is nothingness? So in a way, they're sort of kind of linked. And I have to say, I'm struggling with my non-fiction November. They're not grabbing me. And reading this in parallel to this, where they share a theme, this is wonderfully entertaining, and this is dry. And this isn't as dry as the third non-fiction November book that I've started, which I'm just going to read a chapter, every so often throughout the month of November, because I find it really hard, a real struggle to get through it, even though it's informative. But just there's something about language and metaphor that makes fiction like I'm an addict, and non-fiction, which I've never experienced before, to be fair, in other non-fiction Novembers. So maybe it's just an unlucky choice of the 3 books that I've started. I don't know, but yeah, it just makes me want to return back to fiction. So there you have it. That was my recent reads. Till next time, thanks very much.